Welcome back, everybody, to a new episode of Podcast on the Brink, and pleased to be joined by somebody that I've known now. It's been quite a while, actually. Kyle, makes me feel like I'm getting old. We first met each other probably at AAU tournaments back in, probably 2008, 2009. Kyle Neddenrip of the Indy Star. Welcome back to Podcast on the Brink. How you doing?
Good, thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's been. I guess we have known each other for quite a while. Yeah, 2008 is when I started, so it's probably right around that time. So yeah, going on 13, 14 years now.
Yeah, I started in 2007, so probably didn't start actually going to events till a couple of years after that. So right around the same time, watching some of Tom Crean's first Indiana recruits grinding the. What was that? The Adidas Invitational. That was the big thing in Indy there for a while. Every summer, where all the coaches would come. That used to be a really good event. But
we were just talking about that today. I was talking to somebody about that. I remember when Cody Zeller and that Indiana Elite team was playing. You know, they had, I think, 70 of the 74 Power 5 head coaches were there. You know, you'd walk the hallways at North Central and you'd see, Coach K and all the, Roy Williams, all of pretty much any coach you could think of at that time was there. And it was a pretty big deal. And that we were talking about today because the Adidas Invitational is actually this weekend. And it's more of a second tier tournament now because the Adidas schedule has changed and they're going to Birmingham, this week is kind of their gauntlet opener for July. So, that tournament's changed a lot. And just the whole cycle of things has changed, but yeah, those are good memories of covering that. And then you'd have, you cover that and then they'd have some other, more minor tournament would kind of start right after that, almost immediately. It was kind of seems like a weird way to do it, but it was just the windows of evaluation were different then too. So, yeah, those are good, fun memories to look back on.
I can remember that one year when Zeller was there. The big headliner was Shabazz Muhammad. Remember him? He was like the number one player in the country, and he went to the UCLA, played a couple years in the NBA, or I don't know exactly how long it lasted, but didn't live up. It just kind of goes to show you some of these guys that are labeled can't miss number one players don't always pan out. I mean, are you disappointed at all that Indy hasn't been able? I know they've been able to hold on to some of the EYBL events that they have there in Westfield, but have you been? To me, it's a little disappointing that given the success that Indy's had just in general of being able to host events. I know these AAU tournaments are sometimes kind of held on the outskirts, but to me, it makes sense to have events there because it's pretty centrally located and they always seems to do a pretty good job of having events in Indianapolis.
Yeah, everything you hear is always positive, and I don't know if it's just the EYBL has I've had a blast covering that. I mean, that's a really good. I remember seeing DeAndre Ayton play there just a couple of years ago. Seems like, and now you watch him on TV with the Suns in the NBA Finals. So it's always fun to go out there and see guys like that play. But it does seem like it's not quite maybe utilized the way that it could be. It's a great airport. It is centrally located. It's pretty easy to get in and out of here. So I wish they could do more. I don't know if something needs to change with the way Adidas is doing it, or it seems like they could put more stuff here, though. I would say,
for sure.
And hopefully they will. I mean, it makes it easier for me to cover stuff, but the EYBL is a great. I mean, that's been fantastic and about as high level as you can get on a local level to cover. It's very well put together. But yeah, I'd love to see more events like that come here.
One of the reasons I wanted to have you on, Kyle, is we're coming up now on these evaluation periods in the month of July, and you focus a lot on the state of Indiana and some of the players that are coming through the high school ranks. You get a chance to see a lot of these guys during the season. I just wanted to start off, and we were talking a little bit before I hit record, but it seems like these next couple of recruiting classes, a lot is still to be decided in terms of who the top players in the state are going to be. The last couple classes, there's been obviously in 2019 Trace Jackson Davis was a really good player. Keon Brooks, 2020 class, maybe down a little bit. That was the class with Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal. And then 2021, obviously, Indiana wasn't really involved with. They were involved, but they just didn't get the top players, Trey Kaufman and Caleb First. As you look out to like 2022, obviously Indiana's already got CJ Gunn committed, but the next couple of classes, what do you see just in terms of the overall talent, how it compares maybe to the last couple of years, and maybe who are some of the key players that you're watching this month and keeping track of?
Yeah, you kind of mentioned before we recorded kind of the cyclical nature of the classes in the state, and it's a pretty high baseline, I guess. Even the lesser talented classes are still really good. I mean, it's Indiana. You're going to have multiple Division I players every year, no matter what. In 2020 probably was less deep. It wasn't as deep as some of these classes have been in recent years. And then 2021, conversely, was super deep. And I covering the Indiana All-Stars, there was 13 guys that could all play, and that made it really tough for Ryan Osborne, the coach, to get guys all playing time. But you could see it. I mean, it was very deep class, and you could have gone another 7-8 guys easily and had some of those guys on the Indiana All-Star team as well. So, I thought that class was really deep, really good. Obviously, you mentioned, Indiana missed out on some of those guys in that class, Trey Kaufman and Caleb First, notably. Both going to Purdue. But 2022, I think, is probably not quite as deep as 21. But you do have some really high-end talent like Jalen Washington from Gary Westside, which the 21 class didn't necessarily have, that type of prospect, I would say. I think Kaufman and First will both be very good college players, but maybe don't have the, pro upside that a player like Washington has, who can really – step out and shoot the three. And he's a little bit taller, or lankier, I would say, than those two are. Is coming off a knee injury from last year that there's some questions about his overall athleticism, I would say, but still, very good player. And then the rest of that class, you've got some other good players. Deontay Davis, who's going to Louisville. You mentioned CJ Gunn, who committed to IU and then recommitted when Mike Woodson was hired. Really like his upside. And Leland Walker, who's going to prep school, is about as dynamic of a guard, that you're going to find. It kind of reminds you of like not quite as tall as Gary Harris was, but that type of an athlete, and the guy who can kind of jump off the page, and you got kind of guy you pay $5 to go watch on a given night just to see him play. Fletcher Lawyer in that class is going to Purdue. Didn't have a chance to see him play much before his junior year, and was super impressed with him at Homestead. I think Purdue's got a really good one there. Braden Smith, going to Purdue as well, from Westfield, really good player. So there's a number of guys in that class. There's another guy I think who could potentially be a Power 5 player is Charlie Williams from Carmel. 6'10" and pretty good shooter from the outside. Anytime you're 6'10", you got a chance if you can improve your game. So, that class is pretty good. Tayshawn Comer from Cathedral is a point guard who just got an offer from Butler not too long ago. So that class has some high major players in it. Again, probably not overall the depth of 21, which I would compare to 2012 as far as the in-state class goes. But then in 23, and I think that's where, Mike Woodson and the staff can start, maybe making some waves in state. Is, you got a guy like Xavier Booker, who has kind of just exploded here lately as far as his recruiting interest goes. And, you just watching him walk in the gym, you can understand why that is. He's 6'10" and, probably well over 7 foot wingspan. Got an Indiana offer not too long ago. And then also from Crispus Attucks, Jalen Hooks, who's got a number of high major offers as well. So, you start with those two, and then you kind of look down at some others, I think, who could get offers or, potentially would be in the mix. Ashton Williamson from Gary 21st, JQ Roberts from Bloomington North, big, strong player, 6'7". I know he's getting some interest from the hometown school. Joey Hart from Linton Stockton, I know, is getting interest. Logan Imes from Zionsville is a guard with a lot of potential. Miles Colvin from Heritage Christian, who is, Purdue legacy and has, but has an IU offer, has really kind of exploded as far as his recruitment goes recently. There's a lot of others in that class too. So I think 23 and then 24, the jury's always out. I try not to worry, too much about, kids as freshmen, that so much changes unless you're like a super, super high level player. And it's pretty obvious. I think that class probably going to be down as far as it looks now from maybe some of these others, but still, long way to go. And I don't even think about eighth graders or anything like that. 25 will, there'll be some freshmen who play, but I hate to, the more I do this job, you kind of understand, you kind of want to let kids be kids and not put, you do right about some of the ones who are maybe clearly going to be star players, but the other ones kind of need time to, they don't need to be overanalyzed and said they're this, and this when they haven't even fully developed yet. So 24 and 25, I think there's still a long way to go for those guys.
Going back to 2022 for a second with CJ Gunn, one of the questions I get asked most often, people obviously like to follow the rankings, and I think 24/7, not the 24/7 sports rankings necessarily, but the composite rankings have kind of become the thing that I like to cite because it kind of brings in everything. You're not just relying on one service. I think it brings in Rivals, ESPN, and 24/7, kind of blends them together. And with CJ Gunn, people follow his ranking and they see he was, I think, just outside of the top 100 when he committed to Indiana. Now he's fallen down to 143. I don't know exactly how all that works, but what have you seen out of him as a player? I know he struggled in one of the, I don't know if there was 2 junior exhibition games. I know the one I saw, his stats weren't very good, and I think some people took notice of that. But to me, I see a kid that just from watching him on film, it seems like there's a lot of upside there, and somebody who's obviously excited about being at Indiana. He stuck with the program despite the coaching change. So I'm just kind of curious what you've seen out of him. I'm sure you got a chance to see him a lot as a high school player this year, and if you could provide any insight as to why you think maybe his stock may have gone down a little bit since the season.
Yeah, I've seen CJ a lot over the last 2 years, and then especially this past year. I think I probably covered 15 Lawrence North games. I was probably half their games that they played, and made the state championship game. So I had a chance to see him play quite a bit. And when you do see him play quite a bit, you see the good and the bad. You can kind of nitpick over everything, which is nice to be able to do when you've seen a player play a lot. And I think in CJ's case, there were times during this high school season, and you mentioned the All-Star game. There was only one game this year. The juniors played the seniors at Brownsburg during the week, and then there was no Kentucky junior team, so they didn't play each other, but didn't have a great shooting game. But again, it's all-stars, and, you may not get the ball a whole lot, and one bad shooting game, and it looks probably a lot worse than it actually was for him. So I don't know if that maybe played a part. I think probably some things, during the spring, maybe some guys, I think probably just jumped over him, not necessarily anything he did, but probably guys who are being seen more now than they were before. And I think that's part of it as well. But I see with CJ, I do see, I mean, you meant it's overused word, but, upside at 6'5", and a guy who can really shoot it, and I don't always, sometimes, people get classified as a shooter, and then you look at the stats and you're like, well, what are they looking at? That's not necessarily accurate. And I think with CJ, there are games he'll go out and hit, 5 in a row, and it looks like, my goodness, he's he definitely looks the part. And then there's some games where he's 0 for 5, and, it ends up kind of evening itself out. But I guess with him, it's kind of the inconsistency, I think, has been what's, maybe kept him from really exploding and, becoming a more high level, top 50 type of player. Not necessarily even just shooting, but, sometimes with that Lawrence North team had a, he would sort of disappear for a while, and it wasn't always on him. It was, sometimes they had a really good team. So, they had Shamar Avance, who's going to Miami of Ohio, Donovan McCulley, who's going to IU as a football player. He didn't necessarily have the ball that much, but you had, DJ Hughes, who's going to Butler, their big guy inside. So you just had a lot of players. You had a lot of guys who could score and do different things. And there was times you wanted CJ to be a little bit more proactive and, want the ball a little more. And again, that wasn't always. He's a junior on a senior dominated team, and those seniors sometimes did that, which I think is going to be even more. I'm really curious to see this year. Once he is the guy, he is certainly the main cog in their system this year, and what that looks like for him, because I can't wait to see that, and what potentially is ahead for him at Lawrence North this coming year and then beyond at IU, because I think he's and he'll. I think he's got that mentality where he'll like that, like to be that guy, and also defensively. And there's no real other than steals and defensive rebounds. There's no metric really in high schools to show what a good defender he is, and potentially he could be at the next level as well. And I think that's a plus for him also, is his defensive ability and effort on that end. So. I really do, not just, saying this, but I really do like the potential for CJ at the next level. And even, like I said, this year, just to see what he can do. And like I said, there's things, that I think he can do better and do pretty easily to, just become more consistent. And it's not always about shooting. It's about, and not even about effort. It's just about making yourself more, available and, just being that consistent force from possession to possession. If he does that, I think he's about as good as anybody in the state.
Rankings are always an imperfect science anyway. I know you do in-state rankings for kids that you publish on IndyStar.com. But I think more than ever, the time missed from last year and this high school season, I know that just different analysts and people that do this for a living, that watch players and evaluate them, they weren't able to get out as much. So, the one thing I always try to tell people right now, even more than ever, is, the rankings weren't perfect before, and now you've had a situation where we've had this pandemic and a lot of these kids haven't been seen. So I wouldn't take them as anything more than I guess I would emphasize even more firmly that take them as a guide, but not as a definitive picture on what a kid can or can't be. And I wouldn't worry too much about a kid moving up or down, just based on a couple events, or he plays bad for a couple games. But I think the other thing that people talk about with CJ is his stats weren't off the charts this year, but I think you kind of summed up why that was the case. He was on a really balanced team, and I think he was one of the not the underclassmen, but he was at times willing to defer to other guys, and so I think that has something to do with maybe him not putting up the stats that if he was at a different school or in a different situation, I don't think there's any doubt that he could have put up bigger numbers.
No doubt. And that's a great point about the rankings. And I think sometimes, you go through a high school year and you see a guy who fits in differently on his high school team, and then is playing with an AAU team, and maybe it becomes clear, like, okay, well, he's not on the same level as so-and-so. And you can kind of see them play side by side with each other. And, but then you fit into your high school team again, and it's a totally different role, so, and that's what makes ranking so tough. It's like, what are you actually ranking? How well a kid is going to fit into a system is totally different than just overall talent level. And, so it's tough, let's take, like Dylan Windler, who, played at Belmont, went to Perry Meridian, wasn't really anything as far as a prospect goes. Was more of a golfer, and then he goes on. He's playing for the Cleveland Cavaliers now. He's a first-round draft pick. So, it's always, and I know people who do the rankings, I respect them a lot, and know that they put the time in. And, They get ridiculed sometimes for the, for their, their rankings and things like that. I feel that sometimes too. But you do the best you can. And you try to project what you'll see at the next level, not necessarily what the stats are for a particular game or whatever. So it's tough. It's inexact. But I think with CJ, I was definitely had mixed feelings going into the season about him. His junior season had showed some flashes as a sophomore, and then he had that injury that kept him out. Kept him out for basically the second half of the season. He couldn't play, and then so his junior year, I wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't know what he would be, and to be honest, the overall assessment I had was kind of like, wow, he definitely is worthy of being a Big Ten recruit. I when I look back at this year, I don't look back and think, man, he didn't live up to anything. I thought he more than showed what he's capable of, and I think that's fun potentially to look forward to. And so even though he averaged about 14 points a game and 4.5 rebounds, and his shooting percentages were pretty good. He's a 75% free throw shooter, and I think he was about 37 from the 3-point line. So, and like I said, he had a few games where it's like he didn't look like he, was like 1 for 7 or, so that he was a little bit streaky. And at the end of the day was, 37% three is not bad at all. So I think it's just with him, it's just being consistent and, finding his role. And I think easily he could go out and be a 20-point per game guy this coming year. And really be impressive. Now he's going to have to probably do more, and it's going to be harder with teams being able to focus on him predominantly. But even then, I think he's capable of being a good player. One thing he really does, he's got a hard dribble to the baseline, kind of a pull up shot. You can tell that he's worked on a lot, and he gets high on his jump shot and shoots over people. Shoots it well. Like I said, from the 3-point line, and he's also good in transition. I mean, there's no real weakness to him as far as his offense. He can distance, mid range, and get to the basket. So, and like I said, he's a plus defender. But so I think the rankings and things. Like I said, I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, you're not seeing as many guys, during the COVID. And I think that goes for college coaches too. They're going to miss on some guys because of that. And, some guys are going to end up places they shouldn't have been probably, but and I think that's probably the case all the time, but even more so right now. But the rankings are definitely, I think, in flux, more than ever, because some guys just haven't been seen a lot, and you haven't seen, AAU together a lot either. So you're not getting a good gauge on, the top players playing against each other in these big events as much either. So, there'll be some fluctuation. I wouldn't worry too much about it. CJ to me is going where he should be going as far as the level of play. And I'm looking forward to see what he does this year.
In 2023, there's 3 guys I wanted to ask you about. Obviously, Miles Colvin is a kid you mentioned being a Purdue legacy. His dad played football there and went on to an NFL career, but he's got a Purdue offer. I think a lot of people just assume he's going there, but Indiana did decide to go ahead and extend a scholarship offer. Xavier Booker, they got on campus for an unofficial visit, extended him a scholarship offer. He's a big man. I think with you use the word upside, but I think that's what everybody talks about with him, just kind of down the line. I think Jason Delaney at Cathedral thinks he can be a really good player. And Jalen Hooks is, in 2023, a guy that a lot of people talk about. Indiana got him on campus for an unofficial visit, chose not to offer. I talked to Chris Hawkins, who's been around doing this for a long time as the head coach at Crispus Attucks. I think he kind of mentioned to me that Indiana wants to watch him in July and just kind of evaluate and see where he is as a player. Just on all 3 of those guys, I mean, what are your general thoughts on each of them as players, and what do you think maybe is holding back Indiana at this point from offering Hooks?
Well, I would say what you mentioned Miles Colvin first, and I would, I've been in talking to his dad for a while. Did a story on Miles during the season, kind of before he got some of these big offers, and Purdue, I think it'd be silly not to say that they're the team to beat. They are. I mean, his sister's going there to play volleyball as well as the family connection with his dad and being a legacy his dad being a football player who went on and played the NFL. So I think it'd be foolish not to say they're the leader, but what his dad wants to do, and I think what Miles is planning to do is kind of assess who's all offered after July and then kind of narrow it down and, start figuring out, where he wants to really focus in on. And I think IU, I think Purdue, he's got a few other offers out there too. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a number of other high major offers. He's a young, I guess he'll be a junior now, but he's young for his grade. He was only 15 for most of his sophomore year. And you can see that he's grown. He's up 6'5" and long wingspan, and obviously his dad's a pretty good sized guy too. So he's going to be a guy who I think is only going to get. I think he has as much potential as far as growth goes in his game as about anybody, just because he's going to continue to grow physically. So. I would say, like I said, Purdue's probably the team to beat. I wouldn't close the book on it by any means. Obviously, Mike Woodson felt strongly enough and felt good enough about it to offer him. And, frankly, there's a Broad Ripple connection there with his dad going to Roosevelt, going to Broad Ripple as well. So, there's some background there, even though they're different eras. But, so there's something to that as well. So, I wouldn't completely close the book on Colvin and IU, although Purdue, I think, is the favorite. You mentioned Booker, and, he's just at 6'10". I even before this, run of offers he had, he wasn't playing a whole lot for his Cathedral team this past season. I think he was only, about 3.5 points and 3 rebounds per game and come in and get a couple block shots per game, but he wasn't playing a ton on a really deep team. But man, you go to practice over there and you just watch him the little bit he does play and you're kind of like, man, I'd love to see this guy play for, 30 minutes and see what he could do because he's just so long. He can shoot it too, and normally guys who grow that early, they're a little bit awkward and things like that. He's not necessarily a super awkward player at this point. So, the offers have just started coming in like crazy here during the spring. It's pretty easy to see. I mean, it's not a real mystery once you watch his film or watch him in person. So he's going to be definitely a high major. I think he could be a pro, at his size. You hate to put that on a kid necessarily, that sort of on his shoulders, but man, it's hard not to think of what he could become. And I think he'll be, he's definitely on IU's radar, I know, and they've been able to get him over there, and they definitely have some, ways to go in that recruitment because he's going to be a national type guy. And then with Hooks, I think it's just a matter of, how is he going to continue to progress? He kind of became more of a guard this past year. He transferred from Franklin Central to Attucks. Really, they want him playing that guard role more, and at 6'7", it takes a little bit of an adjustment. I think that he's going to have to shoot it a little bit better consistently to maybe play that position, and I'm sure that's probably part of what they're waiting on with him. But you just have to see him play more. He's a good athlete. He's not a super twitchy, but he can get up. He's good for a couple highlight dunks about every game. So I think, again, you talk about consistency. I think that's part of what they want to see more out of him as far as that goes on that front. But, he's just a real solid player, fundamentally sound, hits, he can hit shots and obviously he can score in transition. So, and he's a good rebounder. He gets on the boards and does pretty well on that end. I think he's about 11 points and about 9 rebounds as a sophomore. So clearly he can play at the 4A level. And he's also a pretty good passer. I think he's got a good sense of, court vision and things like that. So I think it's just a matter of being more consistent. And I think putting together a real solid rest of the summer and then a junior year. And there'll be a lot out there for him.
What's been the reaction when you talk to parents and high school kids, coaches, just in general, to the change at IU and Mike Woodson, and how that just in general, how do you feel that's being received? Just kind of maybe not just in Indianapolis, but wherever you've talked to kids, do you feel like it's being looked at favorably?
I haven't really heard anything negative. I've heard all positive things about that change, and I think Dane Fife being on board has also helped with that. A lot of these coaches are familiar with him, from his various jobs, including at Michigan State that he's had, and they've always recruited this area pretty well, even when he was there. So I think there's a lot of familiarity there. Obviously this is a new situation for Woodson completely. Getting into college now, but he's got guys on his staff who've done it before. So I think everything I've heard has been real positive. I think it's even from the very beginning, talking to CJ Gunn right around the time when the coaching change happened, and I sort of Cincinnati was a school that was really he was really considering really hard at the time, and at the time he committed, and it was kind of a back and forth between the two of them, and I sort of expected him to reopen things and not necessarily commit to Cincinnati, but maybe take a harder look at it. And I was a little surprised right away. He said, "Man, after talking to Woodson, I'm all in." So I think that was a good first step, to get that commitment back on the board and move forward from there. But I think they're obviously doing a diligent job of getting the in-state guys at least on the radar. You're not going to necessarily get everybody. That's never really going to be the case when you got so many guys who can go elsewhere. You only have so many spots on a roster. So Purdue's going to get their share. They've been doing a great job of getting in-state guys as well. And Matt Painter kind of is able to, pick the guys he wants and does a good job of getting them there. And it's not always the guys who are the most highly recruited, but guys that fit his system pretty well. But I think Woodson's going to be, they're going to be a player for sure, as they should be. And, everything in these first couple months, I think, has been real positive. I think that's probably normal. That's probably normally the case. But it's going to, take some work. And like I said, Purdue's got a pretty good handle on what they're doing in the state. So, there's going to be some work that has to be done, and they don't always go head to head on guys necessarily, but you need to win some of those battles. And, that hurt that IU lost both Kaufman and First, probably more Kaufman than First, but to lose out on Kaufman, that was a pretty big loss, I would say. Not, at least from a perception standpoint, and time will tell from on the court standpoint, but definitely a perception from a guy who was Southern Indiana and a spot where you normally do pretty well.
I feel like we did this a little bit with Crean after he was gone, just in terms of going back and looking maybe at some of the biggest misses that he had, because I remember that 2012 class, the movement, as it was called, that class, everyone talked about how it was going to be program changing. And, obviously Yogi Ferrell was a really, really good college player. He's still playing in the NBA, but you look at the other guys in that class and it didn't really work out. And, looking back at what Archie was able to do from a recruiting standpoint, Romeo Langford was obviously a very big get at the time, but in terms of his overall impact on the program, it was very minimal, just in terms of on court. He was there for a year. He got hurt, and it didn't really translate to a lot of on court success. Trace Jackson Davis has been excellent. I think he's going to be a preseason All-American. But when you look back at what he did, I thought he did a pretty good job recruiting the state. But would you agree that in terms of misses, the biggest ones were Jaden Ivey going to Purdue? I would say Indiana didn't seem like they really even put up much of a fight on that one. And then Aaron Henry, I remember it was the first summer after Archie was hired, and there was a day where Race Thompson committed, Jerome Hunter and Demezi all committed, and it was right around the time that they had offered Aaron Henry a few days before that, and it almost seemed like it was those guys vying for a couple of spots, and Hunter and Anderson both took the spots, and Henry ended up at Michigan State. I mean, do you agree that those were probably the two most notable misses that maybe could have changed the trajectory for Archie and Bloomington?
Yeah, I would say so. You could say, Aaron was always a guy that I felt like, even early on when he wasn't necessarily a star, you could kind of see what he could become. And, just the way he played the game, the way he understands the game, and then his athleticism really, he got in better shape and just became a really, he won a state championship as a junior at Ben Davis and was really the linchpin and a really good teammate. So that was probably the biggest one, the biggest miss, I would say, and a guy who could have really changed your whole complexion of your program in a lot of ways. And you're right that you look back and you're like, man, Archie Miller he got a lot of guys from in the state, and he there for a while. IU wasn't getting any Mr. Basketballs year after year. I remember having this conversation with Tom Crean shortly after he was let go, and a pretty long conversation about it. And there was all different reasons for each one of those kids that they didn't get. But it all adds up, and you're like, at the end of it, you didn't get. There was a long run of not getting them. So they were able to start to do that, but the ones that they did get maybe didn't pan out to the extent that they needed them to, like Demezy Anderson and some others. But the ones that you miss out on, you're kind of like, dang, how did we miss on that? Or, gosh, he turned out to be a really good college player. Jaden Ivey was probably more of you would thought of as a Notre Dame guy than a Purdue guy necessarily. Purdue did a great job getting him in there, and to me, I always thought he was potentially the best player in that class, and he's turned out to be really good at Purdue. But I would not also, I think Trey Galloway and Anthony Lill can still also be really good players for IU as well. So, the book, again, it's not completely written on those guys, but yeah, Ivy and Henry definitely stand out. But the fact that he got Trace Jackson Davis there, it's always easy to kind of go back, like you said, to sort of relitigate what happened, and that's kind of the fun of it too, is to look back and see, gosh, that guy turned out to be pretty good. That guy didn't. I wouldn't have thought that at the time, or whatever. You just never know for sure. But Eric Hunter was another one from Tinley. I thought IU might have had a chance to get him. He goes to Purdue. So there have been some, definitely some misses in the state. Everybody has them. It's till the end of time that'll happen. But it's just been weird because you felt like Miller was doing a pretty good job in the state, and Crean wasn't, for a while. But other than the Zeller and you think back to that, that's almost been a decade ago now, and probably was a decade ago. They got Zeller and Yogi, back to back, and it was like, here we go. If you're an IU fan, that was huge, and it turned out to be huge, but couldn't really sustain that momentum. And ultimately from a perception standpoint, that really, I think, hurt Tom Crean, for all the good things he did. The in-state recruiting always seemed to be something that was held against him, which is kind of interesting to look back on, because you think about the Zeller and Yogi recruiting victories, and then, kind of had trouble sustaining the in-state momentum from there.
I want to change gears before we get you out of here and ask you about, the book that you wrote back in 2010 about the, it obviously took a lot of time for you to research all the gyms that you did, but I had a couple of users or readers of the site submit questions that they were curious to know just based on that project. The first one, what's your favorite high school gym in Indiana and why? And the other one was, which gyms did you find most interesting that you got to visit when you were doing research for that book?
Oh man, I actually just did. I submitted something for we're doing a project this summer. I had to write like 250 words on my favorite gym, and I picked Southport Fieldhouse. Just it's one that I've been to probably more than any. Just covering various things and tournament games and Marion County tournaments and regionals and things like that, and I just really enjoy it. Southport and Evansville Wrights played there. I think it was 2015 or 16 at the end of the season. Wrights was undefeated, And I'd never seen that. Well, I guess I had seen it a couple times, but that gym was completely packed for a Southport home game, which I hadn't seen before. And, so that was just, that was really fun. Something I'll always look back on, but I just love the way that gym is constructed, kind of that roundhouse feel to it. And the bleachers are up above, but even if you're sitting in the top bleacher, it doesn't feel like you're that far away from the floor. And it just feels like a bit, for whatever reason, it feels like the players are kind of on a stage there, and the fans are kind of in the back. And, you're close, but you're kind of off to the, in the background a little bit. I think Newcastle Fieldhouse is a lot that way too. And to me, the bigger this gym isn't always better, but Newcastle's awesome because it also doesn't feel that big. You walk in and everything's beneath you, and that parquet floor, it just feels so different than anything else. So there's so many great ones. I pick Southport though because that's pretty close, and I'm there a lot, and I just, they've done a lot of things to that gym too. They got a new floor. It's kind of it has an old school feel, but it also they keep it in great condition as well. But to me, like Newcastle, the Hatchet House, and Washington, those three kind of feel like they stand above the rest. The Hatchet House for a packed house is just so unique and fun as well. And if you go to I went to a Bar Reeve, Washington, they always play the night before Thanksgiving. Went down and covered that one year, and it wasn't completely packed, but it had that family vibe to it, and two neighboring schools playing each other was so much fun. But I would say going around to visit, I had a real neat experience at the Wigwam in Anderson. It had closed as I was doing the book, and I didn't at the time. I was doing the book. I was writing only about schools that had closed and they were consolidated, but the gyms were still in town. And so many of the gyms I'd go into, I'd have to ask some guy in town to let me in, or just try to find somebody to help you get in so I could walk around, take pictures, and then just learn about it. And I just kind of, a lot of times I'd show up to these towns not even having any idea of who to talk to, or who I was looking for. I remember the Versailles at the Tyson Auditorium. It's where the Milan team played in '54. They would play their home games down there because their home gym was too small. And I remember the guy at the town hall, they had a key down there. Someone had told me they had a key there. He's like, yeah, just take the key, go let yourself in, look around, lock it when you're done, and make sure you turn the lights off. So that's one that stands out that I remember. There's
should have called us for some pickup. Yeah, the key.
I had some people reach out and say, "Hey, why don't we try to get some pickup games going in these gyms?" Yeah, that'd be great. I'm probably too out of shape by now to do that, but yeah, there's a lot. The Anderson, like I mentioned, the Wigwam, that was actually after I'd written the book, but I got a chance to walk around in there, and you talk about feeling like a ghost town. I can't even remember. I got in there with a photographer and one of the guys who. From the school let me in, and we kind of walked around, and everything was still like there was stuff still in the locker room. It was almost like people just walked out and left, in a rush, and left stuff in there. So that was really kind of an eerie, feeling. And I know they're still hoping to play games there at some point and reopen it. I hope they do. It's a great place. But I've been lucky enough to be in a lot of these great gyms, the ones that people don't know about, and a lot of the ones people do know about. The ones people don't know about, unless they're local in that town, are really, really cool and fun to be in those different places. And some of those gyms, I was 10, 11 years ago. Some of those gyms have been torn down even since. And I knew they would be at the time. That's kind of the reason I wanted to do the book, is to get them, published before they did get torn down. And I don't know how I did 100 of them. I think I know at least about 4 or 5 have been torn down. I need to go back and kind of relook at that and see, how many exactly. But it's always sad every time I hear one has been torn down. It just makes you a little bit sad to see that go away.
Yeah, for sure. It's, as my a lot of my mom's side of her family grew up in Anderson, so I grew up as a kid. We'd go visit my grandparents. We would go to games at the Wigwam, and it was. it was always just a great place to watch a game because they would always have a ton of people there. It was like the thing to do, on a Friday night in Anderson, Saturday night the gym would be packed and like you, I was it's sad to just to kind of see these places that that a lot of people grew up with and going to games with and have these memories not being able to be used. But I think that's what makes a place like Newcastle so special, because it's still maintained, it's still so important to a lot of people. I can remember that one going to the Hall of Fame Classic growing up. I remember seeing Luke Recker play there, and it was, there was people standing up top because there wasn't any more seats, and that's that's kind of the beauty of high school basketball in Indiana. There's always you talk to people and everyone has a story of a gym that they like to go to growing up and watch a game. So that's kind of why I wanted to ask you about that, because I think that was an awesome thing that you did with that book. And I think it's still on Amazon, right? If people want to pick it up. I know it's been a while since you've written it, but it's still out there if people want to check it out.
Yeah, I always get people still tell me, they just got it or they read it, or, that means a lot. They went through, I never, thought, and it's not like it's a bestseller or anything, but I still, I appreciate the fact that people are still finding it and it makes me feel like it was worthwhile, even though I didn't really make any money, off of it. I didn't even understand what the publishing process was. History Press did the publishing of it, and they did a great job. They got professional to do the cover, which is Sullivan's gym, and the guy was from Sullivan. I went down there right after it came out and did a book signing down there. I couldn't believe how many people showed up for the book signing, and that's one of the biggest highlights of my career, probably, even though it was in this little town. And the hometown paper did a story about it, and it meant a lot. That's the only book I've ever done, and maybe the only one I ever do, but it was something I was passionate about, and I'm glad people find it still. And there's definitely things about it I wish I would have done differently, but at the same time, it's one of those imperfect, perfect things, because I'm just glad I did it, and I'm glad people still are able to enjoy it.
Well, like I said, the book's on Amazon. Kyle can be found on Twitter just by searching his name, Kyle Neddenriep. He's also in the Indianapolis Star. I would subscribe to that. Zach and Kyle both do a really good job. Zach on the IU beat. Kyle, I enjoy reading Greg Doyle too as well. So they've got that's an all-star cast that the Star has. So definitely support those guys. Check out their work. Kyle, thanks for being generous with your time and for coming on the show. And we always appreciate the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Alex, and enjoy your work and enjoy seeing you out. Hopefully see you soon.
All right. We'll be back soon with another episode of Podcast on the Brink. Thanks everybody for listening.